Welcome to World Affairs Today, brought to you by the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., a leading forum for global education and international affairs.
John Hofmeister was not a petroleum engineer by training. In fact, he spent much of his career prior to joining Shell as a human resources executive with major companies such as General Electric, Allied Signal, now Honeywell, and Northern Telecom, currently known as Nortel, and the first several years at Shell as Group Human Resources Director of Royal Dutch Shell Group before becoming president here in the States. While president of Shell Oil US, from 2005 until 2008, in seeming anticipation of the now popular television program Undercover Boss, he would travel around the areas of the country by car and visit Shell gas stations unannounced to see how things were going. Upon retiring from Shell, he founded and runs Citizen for Affordable Energy, a nonprofit to educate citizens and government officials alike about pragmatic, nonpartisan, affordable energy solutions, environmental protection, energy alternatives, efficiency, and quality of life. And he has also written a book, the focus of tonight's presentation, Why We Hate the Oil Companies, Straight Talk from an Energy Insider. We look forward to the interesting discussion of many facets of energy, environment, economic, and political nexus here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium John Hofmeister.
Thank you, Heidi, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. The subject I'm going to be discussing tonight may be a bit depressing to you in part of my conversation. I promise, however, before I conclude, I will try to bring whoever is depressed up from whatever level of depression you have sunk into. Unfortunately, it is not a happy story to be describing 21st century energy challenges based on where we are today and predicated on what we are actually doing or not doing. Here are some of the issues that we face as we unfortunately move toward a new age in America that if we stay on our present course, we will achieve by the end of the decade. A new age called the age of the energy abyss, where as a people, across our 50 states, with a few exceptions, we will be experiencing uncommon blackouts, brownouts, standing in gasoline lines, paying extraordinary prices, unprecedented in our history to date, all because we have avoided difficult choices over a sustained period of time, which already counts 40 years going backward. And the argument being that another 10 years of the current course that we were on will now be a 50-year journey to an energy abyss. Let's give praise where praise is due. Our predecessors, grandparents, particularly great-grandparents especially, built for this nation the world's largest energy system, bar none, that did a fantastic job from the 19-teens through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, well into the 70s. We kept building this incredible energy infrastructure using best known technology, using domestic natural resources, using the genius of Thomas Edison and so many others who came together to build whether the electrical infrastructure or the oil and gas infrastructure, the nuclear infrastructure. We built an incredible machine all together which did several things. It helped this nation become the world's largest economy. Nobody argues that. We created a lifestyle that is the envy today, the envy of the world, particularly for those who live in have-not parts of the world. We've fought and won world wars for freedom because we had the surplus energy to make that possible. And we created a viable economy that fed itself. So let's give credit where credit is due. Nobody has yet replicated at the level of the United States of America an energy system as robust as what we built. Problem is, we stopped building on it in the 1970s because it reached a level of penetration, a level of sufficiency that we didn't think we needed more. And energy has consistently been affordable for all Americans because we always had more supply than we had demand. And as long as there was greater supply than demand, whether it was gasoline or diesel or aviation fuel or electricity measured in kilowatt hours, priced in what, 3, 4, 5 cents a kilowatt hour? It was very affordable. But that system built in the 20th century is now ranging from 80 to 90 years old to 40 to 50 years old, and it was never designed to last forever. Coal plants, for example, that produce electricity, designed for 50 to 60 years. The average coal plant is now almost 40 years old in this country, with the median coal plants over 40 years old, which means more plants are older than younger. They're coming to the end of their useful life. Nuclear plants built for a 40-year life. The last one was constructed 30 years ago. And unless we extend licenses beyond what was intended when they were first built, within 10 years, we're going to start shutting down nuclear plants by the dozens. We have 104 nuclear plants, all built about 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. We've put 100 new coal plants on the shelf in the last 5 years. They won't be built. Not because we can't afford them, but because it's too difficult to license them and to permit them. So when they're not going to be built, over 100 plants. We have been building gas plants. That's what's largely been keeping our system robust to date. But that's also because we haven't been decommissioning coal plants or decommissioning nuclear plants. Were we to be decommissioning plants, as we will be within the decade, because of old age, we won't have enough gas plants to pick up the load. Today's Wall Street Journal talked about new environmental regulations being written today as we speak in the EPA, which could, by 2015, lead to the end of the useful life of about 7% of our whole utility system predicated on coal-fired plants. They simply will not be allowed to operate given the environmental impact that they are having if the new regulations are put forward by 2015. So a world of blackouts, brownouts, gas lines. We used to drill enough wells in this country to produce 10 million barrels of oil per day. Today we're at 7. But try to get a deep water drilling permit today, you can't. The moratorium officially was lifted, but we're now into phase 2 of a moratorium, not announced as phase 2. I'm calling it phase 2 because it's going to be a period of regulatory uncertainty where oil companies who want to drill in the Gulf will probably be waiting a year or longer before anyone is permitted to drill another well. And then we'll get to phase 3, because phase 3 will be those companies who ultimately finally get a permit, there will be a lawsuit filed against the granting of the permit, the lawsuit filed against the Department of the Interior, not the company requesting the permit. And over the next 1 to 2 years, as we are not drilling, Gulf of Mexico production goes into decline. And so a year and a half, 2 years from now, we're producing 1 million to 1.5 million less barrels of oil domestically, meaning we have to import it from guess where? The world that doesn't like us very well, in order to keep up with demand. Because for all of our desire not to drill, nobody is doing anything to reduce demand. And every day when we all wake up, we have to anticipate where are 20 million barrels of oil coming from today, because that's what we will consume. That equals 10,000 gallons a second. A second. A swimming pool full of oil every second, of every minute, of every hour. Coal consumption, roughly 1,200 trainload cars of coal per hour, one every 3 seconds. Every minute, 20 coal cars. 20 coal cars times 60 minutes, 1,200 coal cars full of coal per hour. Natural gas, we're consuming about 60 billion cubic feet per day. Not million, billion cubic feet of natural gas per day, which if we stack those cubic feet on top of each other, hypothetically, we could go from here to the moon and back 25 times per day. That's the kind of volume that most people don't appreciate, because they tend to think about their gas tank, their house, their office, their family, or their city. But there are a lot of us out there. And we live an energy prolific life where everything we do requires electrons or liquid fuels. We love tomatoes in winter, but you don't grow tomatoes on the Maryland shore in winter. They come from a long way away. We like strawberries year round. But strawberries have a very short growing season in this part of the country, in May, early June. But we eat strawberries year round. So we have an energy prolific life based upon the homes that we live in, the appliances and the electronics that we put in our homes, our offices, and we are not shrinking as a population. Many who argue that efficiency is the future forget to recognize that our population continues to grow. We could reduce per capita consumption, but still increase overall demand for energy based upon population growth. The supply of energy currently exceeds demand slightly, but not by choice. It's by virtue of the weakness of the economy. So we're down from the oil consumption of 2 years ago, but only slightly. We're down from the electricity consumption of several years ago, but only slightly. With nearly 10% unemployment, a lot of people aren't driving, who would otherwise be driving. What we are doing is disinvesting or uninvesting in the core energy system, which delivers 98% of our energy. 93% of our energy comes from nuclear, oil, coal, and natural gas. 5% comes from hydropower. But we haven't built a new dam in decades in this country for hydropower. So 98% of our energy is not receiving the level of investment it needs to sustain it. While we spend a lot of time and discuss all over the country the opportunity for wind and solar and biofuels, which represent 2% of our energy supply. We could double it, which is the administration's goal, by 2012, and we get to 4%. Double it again, which is the administration's goal, by 2016, and we're still single digit. But over that 8-year period, we're not drilling. We're not building coal plants. We're not building nuclear plants. And they're getting older and older, and if you don't replace existing wells with new wells, your oil and natural gas production goes into decline. So when you put all the facts together, the depressing reality is, absent a change in course, all the windmills and all the solar farms and all the new biofuel will not make enough of a difference to keep supply ahead of demand. When demand exceeds supply, two things happen: prices go up and availability goes down. You might say, well, what's the industry doing about this? Well, the industry oil companies, utility companies, wind farms, solar farms, are competing like crazy against each other. That's what they do. So if you will go to Capitol Hill and meet with various senators and congressmen, and you say you're from the oil business, they'll say, well, the coal people were just here. Or the wind people were just here. What do you think about what they're saying? Oh, we don't agree with what they're saying. We want you to agree with what we're saying, which is we need more. We have a problem, ladies and gentlemen, and the problem is, since Richard Nixon declared energy independence in America on Thanksgiving Eve, 1973, when the nation was importing 30% of its oil and found itself in an embargoed, first Arab oil embargo, and were in gas lines and odd even rationing across most of the nation, since Richard Nixon, 7 more presidents, including President Obama, have likewise declared our mission to be energy independence. Last year we imported 65% of our oil, twice as much on a percentage basis as when we first declared energy independence. I am not suggesting that we have ever had an incapable president. They're pretty capable people to get to the office they get to. But why can 8 presidents not get us to energy independence? Meanwhile, 18 Congresses, from the Congress that was present when Richard Nixon announced energy independence within 7 years in 1973, 18 Congresses have also failed us. We do not, as a nation, have a coherent, thought through, short, medium, long-term plan for the energy needs of the future of the world's largest economy. How do we support it? The industry is often attacked, as it should be, because the industry does what is solely in its own self-interest. They're not chartered to do what is in the national interest. They are independent companies, publicly owned, whose goal is to make a profit to return to shareholders. That's their goal, to make a profit to return to shareholders. Whether it's a wind company, a solar company, an electric utility, an oil company, a natural gas company, a biofuels company, they return to shareholders. That's what the private capital market industry is all about. So to expect them to get in a room and figure out who's going to do what over what period of time, not only it shouldn't be expected, it would be illegal. It would be restraint of trade. It would be anti-competitive. And they'd all go to jail. It also happens to be one of the most regulated industries in the country, like aerospace. It's a dangerous industry. It needs regulation. It's a dirty industry. It needs regulation. And so everything that happens in the industry is not based upon free market principles other than your choice as a consumer to buy electricity if you're in a state that is deregulated from this vendor or that vendor, or to buy gasoline or diesel or fuel oil from this vendor or that vendor. That's all that's left of the free market, your choice as to who you purchase from. But every other activity, every other transaction is regulated by one branch of government or the other, one set of rules or regulations or laws or the other. And I'm not arguing that it shouldn't be. Hydrocarbons are fundamentally dangerous, as we've seen at the Massey coal mine last April, as we saw at the Macondo well last April. April was a bad month for hydrocarbons in this country. But any day of the week could be a bad day of the week. If you lived in San Bruno, California, they're still cleaning up the 58 homes that were destroyed when a 30-inch pipeline blew, suddenly, without warning. Part of the old infrastructure got weak, blew out. So what are we going to do? We need government leadership. We need political leadership. It was right for President Nixon to say energy independence, but he didn't deliver. And neither have any of his successors, and neither will President Obama if he stays on his current course. When he spoke from the Oval Office in June with respect to the BP blowout, he said, "Let this remind us that we need a 21st century new energy system, and we will predicate it on wind and solar and biofuels." You can't get there from here, ladies and gentlemen, on wind and solar and biofuels, because it doesn't meet the fundamental criteria of an energy system, which is ubiquitous. We don't have wind everywhere. We don't have solar everywhere. We don't have enough sunshine in the northern part of the country to make it worthwhile on a large scale. We don't have a lot of wind in the southeast or in the middle Atlantic states or on the west coast. Not as much as we would need. And here's a real live story. It just happened this August. Texas has the largest wind capacity of any state in the country. Many people think Texas is an oil state. Texas is a wind state. It has 9,700 megawatts of installed wind capacity. That's the equivalent to 10 very large power plants of wind capacity. During August of 2010, a very hot month, Texas had 4 days of record consumption of electricity. It was so hot, the air conditioners were blowing cold all day long, all night long. That 9,700 megawatts of electricity capacity delivered all of 570 megawatts. Because what happens on the high plains of Texas in the heat of summer is the wind doesn't blow. That hot air blocks the cool air that would normally flow down from the higher altitude of the eastern Rockies. But it couldn't push that hot air away. There was too much of it. And so the wind didn't blow. And so 9,700 megawatts of electricity wasn't produced, other than the 570 that was. So when the wind doesn't blow, it doesn't do you much good to have wind energy. And when the sun doesn't shine. So you can't build a system when it's not ubiquitous, when it's not continuous. Coal and natural gas and nuclear and hydropower are continuous. And in combination, they're ubiquitous. And when it comes to liquid fuel, it needs to be homogeneous. It has to be useful in all the engines we have. We introduced ethanol. Some of you may own a boat. When we went to 10% ethanol in the last few years, a lot of boat owners were burned badly because they had boats which couldn't tolerate the 10% ethanol added to the gasoline. It's not homogeneous. The plastic parts were corroded. Plastic tanks corroded because ethanol is alcohol. It's a very different molecule structure than gasoline. And that has to be accommodated. So where are we going to go? What are we going to do as a nation? Well, we look to our government, don't we? And if you remember the 2008 convention season, we had the Democratic Party off in Colorado. We had the Republican Party off in Minneapolis. And what did we learn about the future of energy from the Democratic platform and the Republican platform? Well, it was visible on television. The Democratic convention started chanting, "No more coal, no more coal," the essence of the energy strategy as proclaimed by that convention. No more coal. The Republicans, not to be outdone, at their convention, led by Rudy Giuliani and Sarah Palin, started chanting, "Drill, baby, drill. Drill, baby, drill." So we have the leadership of the two national parties solving our energy future like cheerleaders at a pep rally. Did the 111th Congress produce any energy legislation? The House tried. The Senate couldn't get it together. Did the 110th? Yes. Did the 109th? Yes. two sets of energy legislation in the 109th and 110th, but they contradicted each other. Because the 109th was Republican controlled, the 110th was Democratic controlled. And they undid in the 110th much of what they did in the 109th, because they could. We have this unfortunate problem of turning energy into ideology, of turning energy into a political philosophy of good and bad, of old and new, of green and brown. But the electrons going through these light bulbs right this moment don't know where they came from. Energy is just energy. And we need it. So to dichotomize energy into a this way or a that way is a non sequitur, and we didn't do it in the 20th century. It was bring on all the energy we can to grow the world's largest economy, to have the most envied lifestyle, and to protect freedom. But we somehow got into this issue of deciding that there's good energy and there's bad energy. And therefore, one party is good or one party is bad depending upon which energy they choose to support. And the companies don't help in that regard either, because the companies tend to choose one party or the other party to support on the basis of which one is more likely to give them the legislative policy that is better for them. It gets worse. I'm sorry. The partisanship that I've been describing is but one of the problems. And the partisanship, as we know, is very deeply embedded in our political dialogue and our political process. And we're watching TV commercials by the night right now, reminding us how deeply embedded that partisanship is. The second problem is time. The time frame that is in people's minds. If you're an elected official, your world can turn upside down in 2 years. Look where we were in 2008. Look where we are today. 2 years for an elected official running for office, the world can turn upside down. But energy takes place over decades. Energy executives making capital investment decisions need a predictable, continuous expectation of the investment environment for spending billions and billions of dollars over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. 2 years is the blink of an eye. 4-year presidential campaigns, the blink of an eye. At most, a president can be working at it for 8 years. For an energy person, that's a short-term plan. Short-term planning in energy time is 0 to 10 years. Medium term is 10 to 25 years. Long term is 25 plus years. For elected officials, they don't know if they'll be around 2 years from now. So they try to do what they can do, so they will be around 2 years from now, which means they make choices based upon what's popular. Energy choices may not be popular. One of the reasons we're not building any nuclear plants is nuclear became very unpopular after 3 Mile Island. Although nobody died, a lot of people got scared. And waste management and nuclear plant construction came virtually to a halt. And it's never recovered. And all the people who were part of building out that nuclear energy infrastructure are essentially all retired. And many have died of old age. So where do we build the next nuclear plant? We're hardly training people to construct them, to design them, to permit them. So we won't build one this decade, I can assure you. And then there is the complexity of our government structure and process itself. I've been all over this town, from one end to the other, asking everyone who understands the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch, can you please explain to me why the executive branch needs 13 cabinet-level agencies to govern energy? We have one Department of Defense. We have 13 cabinet officers governing energy. Many people think Stephen Chu governs energy. He runs the Energy Department. That was a logical conclusion, but it's wrong. The Energy Department has a very limited scope of what they do for energy. Department of Interior, Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, Department of Agriculture, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Department, and on and on and on. 13 cabinet-level officers and thousands of people who work for them at cross purposes, because cabinet officers are charged by Congress to do different things. And so you get caught in a permitting maze. When I was president of Shell, I doubled the size of my Washington office, not to do a lick more lobbying, just to figure out how government works, to speed up the process by which we could get permits, by understanding better how government works in the executive branch. But if you go to the legislative branch looking for relief, you're not going to find it. There are 26 congressional committees and subcommittees governing energy and the environment. Why? Why 26? Why not 2? One for the House, one for the Senate. It's not done that way. And then every federal judge in every circuit court has the ability at the bench to decide energy policy based upon the law that's being tested at his or her bench. And so we get drilling permits overturned. The administration is very frustrated right now because 2 judges have declared the moratorium illegal. The executive branch is in violation of the judicial branch's ruling. They may say it's moot because the moratorium has ended, but it's not. Nobody's drilling. And another judge just declared the new regulations in shallow water illegal because the Interior Department violated its own processes to set new regulations. And the court caught them on it. So we have this complexity. We have this dysfunction. If you're looking at it as an outsider, it's dysfunctional. And I submit it's unfixable in its current form. Hence the energy abyss. Unless, and I'll close on this point, unless we draw from American history. We draw from American history where in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when we kept pushing off the hard decision of do we or don't we have a national bank, and we kept saying no, we don't want a bank for the nation. We had depressions, recessions, panics. Read the history. And in 1907, the U.S. Treasury went into default. It's also called belly up. Couldn't pay its bills and couldn't borrow money. Its credit worthiness was zilch. J.P. Morgan, the person, and his friends on Wall Street bailed out the U.S. Treasury on the promise that this will never happen again, except it did in 1912. We couldn't come to grips between the White House, the executive branch, and the legislative branch, couldn't come to grips with whether we will or won't have a central bank for the nation. And it was the default, the crisis of the default, that in 1913 created the Federal Reserve Act, which created the Federal Reserve System, an independent regulatory agency to take over the management of the monetary system of the nation. Over the next 97 years, from 1913 to today, the Federal Reserve System, its central board, independent of Congress, independent of the White House, its regional boards, independent of Congress, independent of the White House, who nobody can lobby. Very important factor. Nobody can lobby, and nobody can sue. Well, you can try, but nobody does, because its powers are explicit and clear. And when it makes an interest rate decision, when it makes a money supply decision, when it intervenes, when it sets the open market window rate for the evening, tonight, it does what it does for the sake of the American people, the American society, the American economy, without regard to the next election. So the creation of an independent regulatory agency, I call it the Federal Energy Resources Board, passed by Congress, signed by a president, building a 50-year plan, 0 to 10, 10 to 25, 25 plus. Board of Governors consisting of a diverse group of people who know what they're doing, coming from technology, coming from energy, coming from finance, coming from consumerism, coming from environmentalism. People that know what they're doing, working for the interests of America to do 4 things. Determine the future supply of energy from what sources? How much hydrocarbon? How much nuclear? How much hydropower? How much hydrogen? How much geothermal? How much wind, solar, and biofuels? The future of efficiency, where technology becomes the basis for improving the efficiency with which we use energy. Thirdly, protect the land, the water, and the air based upon the energy we're producing. We owe our children and grandchildren and future generations a cleaner land, water, and air system than what we have today. We got what we got because we didn't know what we needed to know when. We didn't understand in the 20th century what we were doing to ourselves. It was Katie bar the door, just do it, without fully understanding the implications of how we were going about doing it and what we were going about doing. So we need more environmental protection, but don't do it politically. Do it based on what's good for America, pragmatically, scientifically. And fourth, we've got to have infrastructure. The NIMBYists cannot always win the day. We need new pipelines. We need new transmission lines. We need new power plants. We need new storage tanks. We need new pumps. We need new everything, because the old system was never designed to last forever. It has to be replaced. And it has to be replaced in a timely way or the risk goes up. And people die when the risk goes up. And brownouts and blackouts are killers of people. Not just economic impact, it kills people. When operating rooms shut down, when traffic lights shut down, when people can't get money out of their bank system, when banks can't operate, people are harmed very quickly. An independent regulatory agency created in a democratic manner, putting to rest the energy system of the future by virtue of thoughtful planning and thoughtful, confident execution, is neither a Republican solution nor is it a Democratic solution, big D. It's an American solution. Thanks for listening. Rebuttal, questions, comments, all the above.
I don't think there's anybody in here that disagrees with you. This is a horrendous scenario that you painted. The trouble is that to get the will to put together this group this commission, what are you going to do about jobs? I heard former governor of Virginia, former senator of Virginia, George Allen today, talk about how devastating all of these things to regulate the environment were to jobs. And so I think your timing stinks, or our timing stinks or something. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I don't think jobs, the kind that we're used to, are coming back to America anytime soon. And by the way, I've been in gas lines a lot of my life. A lot of these young people haven't. I know how terrible they are. Okay.
I think you make a very compelling point. And the system that I envision of building out a 21st century energy system, using all sources of supply, the 10 sources we have, coal, oil, gas, nuclear, biofuels, wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, and hydrogen, 10 sources of energy for the future, can all be developed with private money. Don't need a taxpayer dime of money, because there's return on investment if people could just go do it. They can't go do it. That's the problem. They want to do it, they can't do it. They can't get the permits, or they get blocked by a lawsuit from doing what they want to do. And combining that with sound regulatory environmental protection, land, water, and air, we could create a lot of jobs installing clean technology, including wind and solar and biofuels, which I agree can help us. Just they can't count on it as a new system. But clean coal technology, some people say that's an oxymoron. There's no such thing. That's a nonsense. We're suffering from too much misinformation and disinformation in the political process. Countries all over the world are developing clean coal technology. I've sold it. I sold it to the Premier of Queensland, Australia, to put in integrated gas combined cycle technology with the gasification of coal, not the burning of pulverized coal, gasify coal and capture the CO2 and bury it in the earth, which Queensland is getting ready to do in Australia. We talk about it, but we just don't do it. So we can create millions of jobs building a 21st century energy system, the infrastructure we need. Get rid of the AC transmission system. It's inefficient. The alternating current transmission system that we have today loses 3% of the electricity it carries every mile. What a waste. What a complete and utter waste. We could shift to DC, direct current transmission, or modern technology could take us to superconductivity technology, where there's no loss of friction in the movement of electricity. These are all job-creating opportunities, but we need a plan. And we need enablement. We don't need this condemnation of every effort people are making. And I can just wait for the deficit police to arrive in January. When the deficit police arrive in January, and I'm being hyperbolic, I realize, but with the deficit reduction efforts that the administration realizes and Congress realizes we have to pursue, what's going to happen to the taxpayer subsidies for wind and solar and biofuels? They'll go away. And just as in Spain and Portugal and other parts of Europe today, those industries have come to a screeching halt. The plants are closed because they can't afford it. Because the ratepayers will refuse to support it because the rates are 5 times the kilowatt per hour prices of other more affordable sources of electricity. And the subsidies are designed to make it possible to use these new technologies. But if we're spending deficit money to prop up an inefficient new technology, it's likely to be killed. And we've done that before. We did it in the 70s. And so the job creation through private money, I suggest it would be several trillions of dollars over the next 50 years to build out a new energy system to replace the existing one, and we'd love it. And it would be cleaner and more efficient. It takes will.
What traction do you see from the corporate world to bridge this gap of suspicion between environmental concerns, profit concerns, and so forth, and the political will to do it?
This is a politically improper thing to say in the United States of America. We should look to Europe. We should look to Europe, where there is something called coalition politics in virtually every country, including at the EU. The EU is working on a 50-year energy plan as we sit here tonight, advised by many American specialists. 4 pillars will guide the energy system of the 21st century in Europe. And the nation states have bought in, and they're paying for this system to be created. The coalition of interested parties. So during the middle to late 1990s, Europe decided, across all of the EU countries, to move to low sulfur diesel. And by 2002, half of all cars sold in Europe had to be diesel engine cars. But they needed low sulfur diesel to make it possible. And it's true, today, half of all cars sold in Europe are diesel getting 45 miles to the gallon. We're arguing with ourselves, can we get to 35 by 20-something? We probably can. But they put a coalition together of the industry, yes, the oil industry, environmental groups, government, consumer groups, labor unions. And they came up with a 10-year roadmap to move from the existing system to the new system. And if you drive one of these efficient diesels, 45 miles to the gallon, much cleaner exhaust than an internal combustion engine, and it's turbocharged, they're all turbocharged, so you get much more valuable use of the molecules, it works. The cap and trade system, which is criticized in this country and condemned as cap and tax, actually has been working in Europe for years. It's not robust yet. And they made some mistakes when they set it up, but they're correcting those mistakes. We got to look around. We're living in an island, as if we are the world. And if this is the only country in the world that I've been a party to, I am a citizen of this country, I love it, but we do everything in adversarial ways. We fight to the death over this political policy or that political policy. You'd think health care was the worst thing that ever hit this country if you listen to some of the commercials on TV. You got the lieutenant governor of Texas running for re-election on the premise that he will eliminate Obamacare. I mean, how crazy is that? He sits in Texas. What can he do about a national law? But that's what's going to get him reelected, in part. Probably. And so we have this adversarial way of doing things, and it doesn't get it done. So we ought to look abroad.
Your book title is Why People Hate the Oil Companies, kind of. And your speech was eloquent in terms of what's wrong with our government and what's wrong with our people and how enlightened they are. Could you address some of the reasons why people really do hate oil companies, which has something in my mind to do with the fact that they're multinationals, not responsible to too many companies, countries, that somehow in the midst of the biggest oil crises, the profits seem to be high, kind of like the pharmaceuticals. There's a whole litany of reasons why the public hates the oil companies. Could you address them, please?
Yes, and I do directly in the book. It's a long story, goes back over 100 years. When the industry got started, it was started by very pioneering people who took lots and lots of risk. And they didn't want to meddle with media. They didn't want politicians crawling all over their businesses. And they developed this mindset of leave us alone, we'll get the job done. That's how the industry started. And it's generally frontier also. So it's kind of out where nobody lives. It's rare that you see drilling oil wells in cities. People tend to live where the oil is not, for good reason. You don't want to live in an oil patch. It's not pleasant. It stinks. It's dirty. Oil, in fact, is very unpleasant. You don't want to see it, touch it, taste it, or smell it. It's bad stuff. But it works. It's huge energy content. But in the case of oil companies, they have disassociated themselves over 100 years from the consumer who buys their products. They don't talk about them. They don't think about them. They still have their brand out there, but they don't own the stations. They only own the wholesale business, which delivers to the retail stations. And so they really have had more trouble with retail than they like, so they've disassociated themselves. You can remember perhaps in the 1950s or 60s, some of you, that you used to get tea towels or steak knives or glasses or freebies from a lot of retail stations, and some still do give out little freebies, but it's not from the major oil companies anymore. It's from the local wholesaler who's doing this as a come-on. There's also antitrust that got in the way. When you have so much authority and power over all of the forces of production, from the crude oil to the price at the retail pump, you could be argued to have too much commercial power. I got letters from 48 attorney generals when the gas prices spiked after Hurricane Katrina. 48 states. The only one I didn't get it from was Alaska and Hawaii. All the 48 states sent me a letter from the Attorney General's office of each state saying, "You're gouging the consumers in my state. I want to understand how you are limiting production in order to artificially inflate prices. And I will sue you to get that information if you don't give it to me." We sent them a courtesy letter back and said, "We just had a hurricane. We don't have the plants operating. It's a supply-demand relationship." But I fault the oil companies for failing. I fault the utilities. I fault all energy companies for failing to explain what they do. You know, when you wait in line overnight outside an electronics store to buy the new iPad, and you go in the next morning and you pay the highest possible margin for that iPad, and you come running out of the store holding it over your head saying, "I got mine, I got mine." You love Apple. You love Steve Jobs. You love what they do. You love the product. Because Apple loves you. It's this symbiotic relationship between the consumer and the producer. My BlackBerry, I love my BlackBerry. People love their iPhones. People love the things that they buy. Who loves their oil company? When did the oil company ever do anything for you? Dirty forecourts, dirty restrooms, sloppy convenience stands in the stores. Who wants to buy coffee at a dirty convenience store in a gas station? Many of us do, and some keep it clean, but a lot don't. And so you have this negative experience and the stinky, smelly stuff you're buying, and you don't understand why it costs what it costs. The iPad, you know, is going to cost a lot because it's brand new. Nobody waits overnight to buy gas and says, "Oh, I got my gas." Well, we will, unfortunately. But the relationship is just not considered important by the companies. That includes electricity consumers as well. Utilities rarely spend much time or attention explaining at the consumer level what they do and why they do it and how they do it and what the alternatives are. So I started Citizens for Affordable Energy to bring the pragmatic energy education lessons of today and tomorrow to grassroots America. It's pretty simple stuff. Energy can be very complex, but if you're only trying to understand the pragmatics of energy, it's not rocket science. It's pretty basic. We can all understand it, the same as we can all understand nutrition. You could make a life out of nutrition studies, or you could just live a healthy life knowing just enough about nutrition to keep your body healthy. And most of us do. We can do the same with energy. We can have a healthy relationship to our energy system if we just knew enough to deal with it pragmatically. But most of us just flip a light switch or put a pump valve in our tank only when we need it. So we don't really have that understanding and that common sense grasp of what energy is all about, and the energy companies don't care. That's my issue. That's my concern. That's why we hate them. Yes, sir.
Hello. Just wanted to make mention, this is the last question, but it was a pleasure to hear you speak. I had a question. Your speech reminded me of when I had an interview at American Electric Power in Columbus for a scheduler position, and one of the questions in my interview came up was that, would you rather have a 90% efficiency rate and have rolling blackouts throughout the power grid, or have 110% and have to burn off some of the electricity, or try to sell it to other, utilities throughout the country? My question is, battery technology, I don't think that it's improved that much over the last, let's say, 30, 40 years or not. And just thinking about having to burn off excess energy just because there's no capacity for it or demand for it. Have you seen any improvement or any trend towards change in battery technology so you don't have to have a burn-off rate?
There is work being done on large-scale battery storage, but some people say it has great promise and always will. In other words, they're rather cynical about it. It's battery technology, according to many people, has not moved in 100 years. We had electric cars 100 years ago. The lithium-ion batteries are not without issues, such as the source of lithium. we'll have an OPEC of lithium. And there's no lithium in the United States to speak of. So there's only a few countries in the world that have lithium in quantity, and they will be a factor of control. They will be a control point on supply. So the Chevy Volt or the Nissan Leaf, let me stay with the Leaf. The Nissan Leaf is expected to have lithium-ion batteries that will cost about $15,000 per car.
15,000.
Just for the batteries.
Okay.
The car will cost about 30-something thousand. The battery cost is about 15,000. Normally, with high tech, you would see a dramatic cost reduction in the slope as time goes on. They're not seeing that slope for lithium batteries, because the source of lithium is the issue. And the cost of processing it is an issue. And so it's not simple to solve the storage problem with batteries. Better, perhaps, to solve the storage problem with hydrogen. And DOE is working on hydrogen as a storage source for energy, where you can take the excess electricity, electrolyze water, take the hydrogen atoms from the water from the excess electricity, store that hydrogen for when it's needed, turn it back into electricity. That's some of what's being pursued now. Also, compressed air. There are efforts to compress air on wind farms where the compressed air can be used to generate electricity because when the wind's not blowing. So there are storage techniques being developed, but I think they're pretty far off if we're looking at scale. I think if we're going to have affordable energy, we will always want more supply than demand. That's just the rule of economics. Always have more supply than demand. And I think we have to have affordable energy. What a lot of people don't remember is that the median wage in this country is $38,000 a year. That means half of all Americans make $38,000 or less. They can't afford high-priced gasoline. They can't afford 15-cent per kilowatt hour electricity. Unless we have a welfare system which puts us in a world of energy haves and have-nots. So by keeping supply ahead of demand, we can maintain affordable rates of energy. 6 to 8, 10 cents per kilowatt hour. Gasoline at an affordable price. Or hydrogen as an alternative fuel at an affordable price. Average wage, $50,000. So there's a lot of Americans don't make a lot of money. And we got to think about them too. So when Tom Friedman offers the idea of a freedom tax of $1 a gallon in gasoline, I understand his point, but there's a lot of people in this country can't tolerate $1 extra a gallon just for a tax because they can't afford it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for joining us for World Affairs Today, a production of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Stay connected with us at www.worldaffairstoday.org.